Hey everybody, this is Grace. This video I'm going to talk about when something really spooky, strange, frightening, like there's some mystery behind it and it's happening in your presence and you don't know the answer to it. You can't figure out what's going on. And it's easier, maybe for some, easier on the mind to think that, like say, I'm just being too suspicious, or maybe I'm becoming a little paranoid. But the reality is right there, the proof, the facts, it's right there, but it's still like boggling the mind. How can this happen? And it involves people who are rather, well, I'm not going to diagnose anybody, but their behaviors or characteristics or even their looks are, some would say narcissistic, some would say histrionic, some might say psychopathic, sociopathic, along these lines, the cluster Bs, the DSM, their behavior, some of them. And I think that after a while, if a person has dealt with those and then they've gone through it, for some people they can start to just, on the look, can start to figure things out. The way the person looks. I remember when I was a child. I started thinking, the kids in school say, just the way that one looked, that they're not their appearance as, but they're like their face. Have you ever heard of the narcissistic smirk? Okay. That when they behaved in a certain way, that's a bad kid. As a kid I would say that's just bad all around. And as I went through school with them, it was true. Like some of them became the adult mean girls or mean boys. And but it was, if you've been through it, maybe for some of us we start to figure things out. But there's sometimes, because of the way that they do their smear campaigns, like behind the back, and you don't know, nobody's telling you, but all of a sudden people that you know are just no longer thinking of you as they were before. They're no longer as friendly, or they don't want to have anything to do with you. You have no clue what's going on because it's behind the back, it's behind the scenes, and they're coming up with stuff in their minds that are so bizarre that, you would never even think it. You never done it, but you wouldn't even think to do it. But they spin things, and then they give enough proof, just a little bit of an example, that others believe it. Whew, that was a lot. I said a lot in that. And okay, but like I said, sometimes it's easier to think, easier on the mind, on the brain, to think, I'm just being too suspicious. Or just I'm being paranoid, because the stuff that's going on is so weird. But you have the proof, you have the facts. Now, but it's difficult, because it's often difficult to think that if somebody is actually plotting and planning some kind of it could be a smear campaign or whatever, on me, I'm not doing anything to them. This kind of thing. Like if you're actually a good, decent person, and let's say that these are going to be on jobs and such, I'm going to use those as examples. These things really happen to me. This is real. If it were fiction, I would say it was fiction. But these things actually happen. I'm going to make videos on them. Okay, but it's difficult to think somebody is plotting and planning something against me. Okay, and I'm a good, decent person. I like go to a job and actually do my job. I actually do the work. Back when I was working, I was a career student in college and university. Took a lot of classes, taught at college and university, and I was just career. That was my career thing. I took a lot of classes, and during that time, I did a lot of temporary jobs and seasonal jobs, things like that. And yeah, wow, some of the stuff I've seen, and it wasn't always on me. It wasn't that they were always against me. It was that they're plotting and planning against somebody. The mean girl types of things. But it's not just that. Sometimes there's much more going on behind the scenes that people didn't know about. I usually say you, but that's a lot of people do that. You know, makes it simpler, like you don't know about. Well, you weren't there, so you wouldn't know. But you get what I'm saying. Okay, now I'm going to talk about, give an example on some. I already made one video. It was about when you feel like you're a fish out of water. Well, I did. I felt like a fish out of water. But it was, I'm going to link that video to the end of this one, and it'll be on the thumbnail. But I made that, I guess, a week or so ago. But anyway, it was, I don't think I mentioned what kind of job it was at the time. But what I was doing was getting a certification for what somebody suggested I do. And then somebody else said, yeah, that would be something good for you. Okay, a vocational counselor said, yeah, that would be a good thing. I wasn't so certain, but what I was taught in the classes and everything said, yeah, you know, and the things I saw on job listings, yeah, with my degrees, that might be good. Didn't turn out that way. But anyway, I'll start with this. About, I think it was about in, sometime in 2011, I think. I was wanting some kind of a volunteer, to do a volunteer job. And my mother had dementia. I cannot remember which way everything happened. That was so many years and so much had happened. So I'm going to, as I'm telling these stories, I'm going to start changing it, because I'm going to remember, wait, that's when it happened, or that's when that happened, or how it happened, all came about. But I think before then, maybe I had called to do one, and they said, come in and put in an application or something like that, you know, to be a volunteer at these places. And they're senior living communities. Okay, senior living communities. You know, the people actually pay, people that were wealthy, and then they got to a point where they needed assisted living, or, you know, total care. Maybe they had dementia or something, but they were wealthy and the families paid for it, or they had paid for it. And so I tried one of them, and I think like I said, that I just put in an application, or maybe that was when I applied for a job for. But whatever was the case, something right off the bat, something a little weird happened, which, you know, I just thought it was those two people, you know. As it went, I was with one of my sisters, and she and I live in Texas, and this was happening in Texas, and we were in Oklahoma, and I got a weird phone call at midnight, and it was on my voice. It was a message, voice message, and it was two women were reading my application, and they were cracking up laughing. And they were saying, somebody with your education, somebody like you wants to work here. And they were just like they were drunk. Okay, really. I was like, and I told my sister, let her listen to it. And I said, it's just weird. Yeah, it was just weird. But that whole thing, that whole situation came up years later, or sometime later. Okay, but how did I get there to that? Like I said, I can't remember chronological order when everything happened. It was all so weird. But at first it might not sound so strange, but as the story goes on, it gets weirder as the stories go on. But the first thing I did, the first one I actually worked in, that I recall, it was a really nice one. Okay, I live in the Dallas area. It was a very nice one, and the woman that was the director at the time, she bragged about it and said that it was #1 in the state of Texas. And no, it wasn't. I don't think so. But, you know, bragged. It was very nice. And there was I went there to volunteer, and they told me I didn't have any idea of what kind of jobs. I just knew that I wasn't going to, you know, there's certain things a volunteer would not do. And so they had me work with a woman. They call them activity directors. They call them life enrichment directors. Life enrichment. That means they help the people that are living there. This was assisted living. They assist them in their living. They each had their own little apartment. The residents had their own apartments. They paid for them. Like I said, it wasn't a nursing home. It was a senior living community. And they were wealthy people. And now this director, she was barely, I'd say a few years older than I. And, like I said, I was doing volunteer work. And she just needed help, like setting up the tables to play games. We played a lot of games, that the residents like to play. Like, sometimes it was, like Hangman. Or you remember the game Hangman? Things that I remember doing when I was a child too. And some of them were newer things. And they taught them how to paint. They not taught them, but let them paint and various types of things. And now these are people who are paying for these kinds of services. They're paying for, to have these activities for whether it's the children paying for it or they're paying right out of their own pocket, to have things that keeps them busy and they do things, they can do. Also, they have supplies like, that they can work on their own or play chess or they can do crosswords and those kinds of things. Whatever. I mean, they are within their bill for each month to live there. All these things are included, and that's how it's advertised, and that's how it is. And there are some, state regulations and such, on and on. So these are people who are paying for these kinds of services, and that an activity director, they're usually there just during the daytime, okay, and they do exercises too. I had to learn, different kind of exercises that seniors, many of them were, like, say, many people I've saw in any of these were probably 80 and older, okay, so 80 years old and older, many of them, not all. So anyway, so I went to work there, and I liked it, I did, and the woman that, like I said, she was the activity director, and she was one plan, and all, she did them all and all that. Something about her, there was just something a little off about her. She dressed really nice and she fit the part, but she had that little narcissistic smirk, like some people call it. Every once in a while she'd smirk, like she had something up her sleeve, or she knew something, or that some way that she was somehow devious in her plans and all that. Well, eventually she suggested that I take a certification and, get the certification, which I did, state and federal. And in order to do so, I had to work, I had to put in, not only take classes, which were horrible. That video is about that. But I also had to do, like an internship. Well, it was an internship. I think they call it internship for that. And she had assigned, how many hours I worked and all this kind of stuff. And I had to work a certain amount of hours. But I also did it at a senior living community. Not a senior living community. That was the senior living community. The other one was a nursing home. I did volunteer in a nursing home. I had both experiences. And the woman at the nursing home, she was nice. Okay, she was very nice. She was about my age, maybe a year older. And she was very nice. It was like night and day difference, okay? But the woman with the narcissistic smirk, that life enrichment director, boy, they're the same, really. But they do, different. There is a difference at the same time. I think both of them, they have certification as activity directors, okay? But they call it something else at a senior living community. They call it life enrichment director. Anyway, there were mysterious things about that one. Like at some point after I did all that, got my certification, I went for an interview at some place, and they knew her. And because they fill out a resume, and I gave her as a reference, but they knew her, and they were like spooked by it, that I knew her. Okay, so it was, I don't even remember the whole scene. I just remember like, that was weird, after going in for an interview, and I'm like, well, that was just too bizarre. So, yeah. Okay. Now, I'm going to say that I had visited a lot. I did some volunteer work in other places, and I went to a lot of these, okay, for various reasons, these other places. Like the one that I went to another one or something like that. Or some training we went to yet another location for whatever. So I went in a lot of them, and I quite often noticed that sometimes the person just seemed to be a little bit off. Okay, or the people, there was something going on. Okay, I can't say that enough. And yeah, until the end, maybe I might let a little bit out here and there. But anyway, okay, so I went through this horrible certification. That video, like I said, I'm going to link it to the end, about feeling like a fish out of water. And that was horrible. That was horrible enough. And there were so many more stories just involving that. And some of the things that the people in that training said, some were actually working in the field, and some of the things they said was like, what? Okay, let me give an example here. One of the women that was in the class that it took for certification, she was already working in the field as a life enrichment director. She was working at a place, but she kind of used the class in a way to vent some of her issues. Now, I don't know if during the class she quit or got fired or whatever, laid off. These places had a fun time with that. But she was the one that was really smart aleck to me and said that I was just kissing up to the instructor to get a good grade. I didn't need to. Maybe she did. You know, the type that they're going to turn around on you. I think I passed the class as a top student. But seriously, I mean, I already had a master's degree as it was. Okay, and just you'll have to see that whole video. But she would talk about this one place she worked. It was past tense at that point, and she said that it was very weird because the maintenance guy and the executive director, and I think it was the woman that did the sales, I forgot the title to that, but basically, when the people came in, they wanted to check out the facility and, senior living community. These were assisted living. And then check out the rooms and all that. That was the person that was in the sales part of it, that did that. And told people, what they offer and all that, and signed the contracts. And, well, those two were women, the executive director and that saleswoman, and the man, the maintenance director, he was a male. They're all around the same age. And she told us that the whole thing, everything that was going on was because of these three. It was so filled with just innuendo. Let me put it that way. I'm going to try to avoid certain words. But all they did was talk about flirt and so on and so forth. And these were where senior citizens were living, and they were making what was going on there was just so bad. Okay, because of the way that they were doing this, their attitudes. Okay, not their attitudes, but well, you get the gist. They were just making it. For her, she was, I think, maybe her early 50s at the time, and she says she just didn't want to see such trash. Okay, so, people trash talking, something along this line. That everything was about one certain topic, and that was inappropriate for jobs to her, which could be considered as harassment, and that's how she felt about it. And she let them know one day that she didn't appreciate it. And it was no place for, she let them know, well, she no longer worked there, which is wrong. All that's wrong. You should not lose your job because you report harassment on your job, that kind of harassment. And, but that's all they were about. Well, when I got my certification and everything, I went to a lot of places. I just basically had, back then, faxed out my resume to many places. I had gotten off the computer the names of them. These places, they had a listing on the government websites. It was so neat and easy to work from, so I just faxed them out. And that was one of the places I got called to, which I really didn't know that was the one at first. And then it dawned on me, yeah, that's the one. Because, like, cities and towns can have more than one, you know, of the same, what would you call it? The ownership? Yeah. Anyway, so I went to that one, and she wasn't wrong. I mean, I felt it walking in the door. It took me a while to realize this was the one, and oh my goodness, the sales one, I think it was the sales one, she was wearing fishnet stockings and dressed like, oh my goodness, and this was one of the wealthiest, senior living communities. And I'm like, oh my goodness, the one I volunteered with, a woman was wearing those leather boots that went up above her knees, and she would dress, some would just call this histrionic, because histrionic behaviors, if you look at the some of them, is that they dress provocatively. Okay, that may not all do the same. That was definitely something going on there. But anyway, these are my introductions. The really bad certification program, the narcissistic smirk. It's just something not right about that first director, the life enrichment director, and then the horrible time getting. Let me go in order. Yeah, that, and then the horrible time of getting this, certification, and that class was horrible, and all these things, then going out to interviews. But my first job actual job, it was filled with, like, why is there so much, so many behind the scenes and so many things going on? Like I said, it's easier sometimes to say, it must be me. You're blaming the victim. When you blame yourself and there's something weird going on like that, like I've been describing, yeah, that's blaming the victim. Okay, the target of these types. But there was always so much drama. Check out histrionic personality disorder behaviors. But like I said, no diagnosis. And just so much drama. So I think this is getting long. So I'm going to have to do a video on that job whenever I can. Right now I can't, but that first job, and it was some crazy stuff that caused me physical harm. At least so it was thought at the time. Still questionable, but quite crazy. So, but let me look at my notes here. I wrote some notes down. Like I said, these situations, they have the mysteries, the intrigue, and all this kind of crap going on. Spooky stuff. Oh my goodness. Let me see. I'm reading my notes here. But there are various real reasons why some of these things going on. I mentioned that, I think. The whole of the smear campaign. Okay. The whole story, this is probably long. Like I said, I want the whole story of the first job. I'll tell another video. But we were warned. Here's an interesting thing. We were warned when we took the class that don't go out there expecting that you'll get the first job and you'll really like it. Expect to go through a lot of these jobs before you find the one that's a good fit for yourself. Can you imagine starting and stopping a bunch of jobs before you find the one that is good for you? Anyway, I'll talk to you on another video. Bye.